Dear friends, the Battle of Rezang remains one of the most extraordinary yet underrated chapters of the Indian military history. Fought on the 18th of November 1962, it stands as one of the greatest last stands ever recorded in modern warfare. Yet, its significance is often lost in the broader discourse of the 1962 war. Creating a comprehensive video on this battle is not just storytelling, it is an act of remembrance. At the heart of the Rezangla were the 120 soldiers of Charlie Company, 13th Kumaon Regiment, who defended India's front line at an altitude of 18,000 feet under the leadership of Major Shaitan Singh, Chakra. Outnumbered and facing brutal conditions, 114 of these soldiers fought to their last breath. Their courage demands to be understood, honored, and passed on to the next generation with accuracy and respect. Most people only know fragments of this battle, a vague memory of a heroic last stand. A detailed video allows us to go beyond that, to explain the unforgiving terrain, the tactical disadvantages, the relentless Chinese assault waves, and the incredible discipline with which the company held its ground. Through maps, animations, archival accounts, and narrative storytelling, viewers gain context that textbooks rarely provide. In the digital age, misinformation and incomplete narratives about the 1962 war continue to circulate. A fact-driven, well-researched documentary helps present verified military reports, eyewitness testimonies, and balanced perspectives, giving audiences the clarity they deserve. This story also has the power to inspire patriotism without resorting to exaggeration. Rezangla shows how discipline triumphed over impossible odds, how sacrifice reshaped the nation's defense ethos, and how ordinary soldiers achieved extraordinary feats. It is a reminder that heroism does not always seek recognition, it simply acts. By documenting this battle on YouTube, you keep history alive for a digital generation that may never read about it elsewhere. Such a video becomes a valuable educational resource for students, researchers, defense enthusiasts, and competitive exam aspirants. Above all, it preserves and broadcasts the indomitable spirit of the Indian Armed Forces, the spirit of camaraderie, duty, and the immortal motto of last man, last round. There is a quote, "How can a man die better than facing fearful odds for the ashes of his fathers and the temple of his gods?" Carved onto the stones of the Rezangla War Memorial in Chushul, Ladakh, and echoed at the Grand Memorial in Rewari, Haryana, these words capture the spirit of C Company, now Rezangla Company of the 13th Kumaon Indian Army, which fought under the exemplary leadership of Major Shaitan Singh Bhati, IC 6400, during the Sino-Indian War of 1962. This video, I have tried to cover everything during the battle, before the battle, even after the battle, and in fact, I have tried to focus in what is going on nowadays regarding the demand of the Ahir regiment. Before the India-China War formally erupted on the 20th of October 1962, the relationship between the two nations had been already deteriorated over a decade of mounting border tensions and diplomatic breakdowns. The roots of the conflict lay in the differing interpretations of the frontier inherited at independence. India maintained the Johnson-Ardagh line of 1865 in Aksai Chin and the McMahon line of 1914 in the eastern sector, while China rejected these boundaries as a colonial form of their cartographic aggression. The long-standing buffer between the two countries was eliminated following the People's Liberation Army's entry into Tibet on the 7th of October 1950. Tensions escalated further after India discovered in late 1958 that China has secretly constructed the Xinjiang-Tibet Highway G219 through Aksai Chin between 1956 and 57. Directly linking two major Chinese provinces across territory claimed by India. The situation worsened following the March 1959 Tibetan uprising, after which the Dalai Lama fled to India on the 31st of March 1959, triggering sharp Chinese accusations of Indian interference. Border incidents soon followed, including the Longzhou clash on the 25th of August 1959 and Kongka La incident on 21st October 1959, in which 10 Indian policemen were killed, deepening mistrust and ending the short-lived friendship symbolized by Hindi Chini Bhai Bhai. Diplomatic negotiations during 1960, including Premier Zhou Enlai's visit to India from the 19th to 25th of April 1960, failed to resolve the boundary issue. In response to continued Chinese patrolling, India initiated the forward policy in November 1961, directing the establishment of smaller border posts in disputed terrain despite logistical challenges, thin supply lines, and inadequate equipment for very high altitudes. These outposts, often isolated and under strength, were perceived by China as encirclement and provocation. Throughout mid-1962, the PLA completed substantial military preparations in both the western Ladakh and the eastern Nefa sectors, while Indian assessments underestimated China's willingness to escalate. By September 1962, PLA troops concentrations, road building, and forward deployments were in place remained likely reinforced. When China launched a coordinated assault on the 20th of October 1962, the outcome reflected years of diplomatic failure, misinterpretation of intent, and strategic asymmetry that had developed long before the first shots were fired. The second section would be strategic background, that is pre-October 1962. Until September 1962, the defense of Ladakh was the responsibility of the overstressed 114 Infantry Brigade under Brigadier T.N. Raina, later Chief of Army Staff. The brigade had only 1/8 Gurkha rifles and 5 Jat, with Gurkhas alone initially holding the Chushul sector. As Chinese pressure mounted, 13 Kumaon, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel H.S. Dhingra and stationed at Baramulla at the height of 5,300 feet, was rushed at 5 hours' notice to reinforce the sector. The first elements of around 40 men of the C Company, one of the 4 companies of the 13 Kumaon, after traveling for 16 hours, reached Leh at an altitude of 11,500 feet. After 13 to 14 days of acclimatization, which is at an altitude of around 16,420 feet, a 4 kilometers journey taking about 3 to 4 hours under the command of the Company 2 IC, Captain Prem Kumar. Herein, the advance party of the company found only one Sangha with a holding capacity of 10 men. The rapid movement to a high altitude post caused many men as well as Captain Prem Kumar to suffer from high altitude sickness, causing pulmonary edema. After the basic medical treatment, the captain was evacuated. After a few days, Major Bhati, who was also the battalion quartermaster and 2IC, after handing over the charge to Captain Gurdeep Singh, joined his men with reinforcements and medical help on the 30th of October at Leh, in the process boosting the morale of the company. Next will come to the operational reorganization, October 1962. In the early October 1962, the Army raised the 3 Himalayan Division, later 3 Mountain Division, to strengthen Ladakh's defenses. On the other hand, the PLA was around 4 divisions strong in the contested area. The 114 Brigade was reorganized into a formation of 5 to 6 infantry battalions. That is 14 Jammu and Kashmir militia in the northern sector, 5 Jat in the central sector, 1/8 Gurkha rifles in the Sirjap, Spangur area, 1 Jat LI on the Thangkong Heights, 7 J&K militia in the Dumki Demchok sector, and 13 Kumaon in the Leh sector. Operational control of Chushul remained with the 114 Brigade, whose headquarters were formally established there on the 26th of October 1962. The brigade deployment was reinforced by key supporting arms, like squadron headquarters and 2 tank troops of the 20th Lancers provided Mobile armor, 38 field battery equipped with 25-pounder guns of the 13th Field Regiment delivered artillery fire support, medium machine gun detachments from 1 Mahar strengthened interlocking arcs of fire, and field engineers constructed obstacles, demolitions, and fortifications. These elements anchored the defense of the Chushul subsector, an egg-shaped enclave centered on the 40-kilometer Chushul Valley and accessed chiefly via Spangur Gap near the strategic Chushul airstrip, where most of the deployment was made. Rezangla, located on the southern or southeastern ridge forming the eastern watershed of the valley containing Chushul, which is around 27 kilometers southeast as the south crow flies in the straight line. Identified three principal Chinese approaches: Sakala, suitable mainly for infantry; Thangkung, via routes for Marsmikla or across Pangong Tso Lake, which is half in the Indian territory and half under the Chinese, and most dangerously from Rudok, where a motorable road allowed armor and artillery to concentrate at the mouth of the gap. Chinese success required seizing Gurung Hill and Magar Hill, with a subsidiary threat to Rezangla that could cut the Leh-Dungti-Sakala axis. Brigadier Rena therefore positioned 1/8 Gurkha rifles across Gurung Hill, its northern heights, and the Spangur Gap. 13 Kumaon at Rezangla, Magar Hills, and Paw Hill, that is, the Bravo Company and Delta Company were there at Magar Hill and Paw Hill, and south of the airfield between Thangkung and Gurung Hill, the dead positions at Chushul, and 5 Jat at Sakala and Lukung, with armor below Gurung Hill, artillery at the bases of Gurung and Magar Hills, and the brigade headquarters behind the Chushul village. Next, we'll come to the forward deployment and tactical reality of terrain. 13 Kumaon, later awarded the Battle Honour Rezangla and the Theatre Honour Ladakh, held the forward defences along the Magar Hill and the Rezangla Pass at an altitude of around 16,420 feet, roughly 11 kilometers south of the Spangur Gap. Rezangla itself is a narrow, unforgiving, saddle-ridge feature of around 3 kilometers long and 2 kilometers wide dimensions, a part of the Kailash range forming the southeastern wall of the Chushul Valley. Facing the strategic Spangur Gap, a gap of 6 kilometers long and 4 kilometers wide in dimension, a traditional invasion route between Magar Hill and the Gurung Hill. The ridge offered no natural cover, no vegetation, and no feasible withdrawal route. Compounding these difficulties, a masking ridge blocked the line of sight for the Indian artillery, whose guns were deployed in the west and crested, preventing them from bringing effective fire onto the approaches to the C Company's positions. As a result, the guns of 13th Field Regiment could not provide meaningful support. The first ranging shell fell short and struck the company's cookhouse. Major Bhatti, observing the danger and unable to adjust fire onto the Chinese without further risk to his own troops, immediately radioed the battery to cease fire. The company operated under brutal high-altitude conditions, extremely thin air causing hypoxia, sub-zero temperatures with severe wind chill, frequent weapon malfunctions due to the cold, and limited acclimatization for some of the reinforcements who had recently arrived. Rezangla, a massive feature rising to roughly 5,180 meters, imposed severe constraints on the C Company's deployment. Rezang, Rezang, Rezing, Rechin, a local Ladakhi Tibetan toponym commonly interpreted in regional usage, is referred to as low, slightly curved or recessed ridge adjoining a pass, while La means La in Tibetan is a mountain pass. The company was tasked with holding a 2-kilometer frontage across an exposed, wind-scored ridge that formed a high-altitude ball dominating the approaches from the east. The 3 rifle platoons, that is 7th, 8th and 9th platoon, were arranged in a forward arc facing the expected Chinese axis of advance. Jemadar Surjaram, Jemadar Hariram, and Jemadar, later Honorary Captain Ramchandar, commanded platoons 7, 8 and 9 respectively. The 8th platoon, positioned in the center, commanded the primary approach and formed the backbone of the defense. 7th platoon, with around 35 men, held the left flank along the spur that sloped towards the valley floor, while the 9th platoon, with around 40 men, secured the right flank, covering the broad open slopes later used by the PLA troops during their wide encirclement attempts. The harsh terrain of frozen subsoil and permafrost made trench digging impossible. The defenders therefore occupied stone-built sangars spaced 300 to 500 meters apart with no communication trenches linking them, leaving each platoon position isolated and exposed to direct enemy fire. Some internal depth was created within each platoon, but a deeper Achillean defense across the whole position was impossible due to the wide frontage and limited manpower. The company headquarters was located in depth between the 8th and 9th platoons in a shallow reverse slope depression, the only marginally sheltered ground on the ridge. Immediately behind the headquarters, in the same hollow, the 3-inch mortar section under Naik Ram Kumaon was emplaced just below the crest, 150 yards west of the company headquarters, so that their silhouettes would not appear against the skyline. Even here, protection was minimal. Movement from headquarters to the forward platoons required crawling on overexposed rocky ground, which became continuously swept by Chinese machine gun and mortar fire once the battle began. The company's administrative base, housing the cookhouse, reserve rations, and cold weather clothing, was located in the valley below, completely separated from the fight. A company, less 1 platoon of 1 by 8 Gorkha rifles, fought simultaneously in the Battle historians treat both engagements together under the broader battle line of 1959, while Indian accounts classify them under the overarching Battle of Chushul. Next comes the role of the Indian Air Force and the nearby Ladakhi villages. India refrained from employing the Indian Air Force offensively in the 1962 Sino-Indian War, largely because the political leadership feared that the air strikes would provoke Chinese retaliation against major Indian cities. This concern rested on an exaggerated belief in China's ability to operate combat aircraft from Tibet, where no viable high-altitude airfields existed. Indian decision-makers also underestimated the IAF's advantages. Modern fighters, bombers, and well-located air bases that would likely have secured rapid air superiority. As a result, the IAF was restricted mainly to transport, reconnaissance, and evacuation roles, denying ground forces close air support in critical sectors like Chushul and Tawang. This restraint was reinforced by a civil-military decision-making structure that excluded the Air Force from early operational planning. Most historians now view the non-use of offensive air power as one of India's major strategic miscalculations in the conflict. During the Battle of Rezang, the Indian Air Force played a limited but crucial logistical role due to the political decision not to employ air power offensively in the 1962 war. Although no combat air missions were flown over the Rezangla, the IAF was essential in sustaining 13 Kumaon in the harsh Himalayan theatre. Transport aircraft, primarily 9 Fairchild packets and Dakotas, air-landed or air-dropped vital supplies at the Chushul airstrip, that is the ALG Advanced Landing Ground west of Spangur Tasso, including ammunition, rations, kerosene, and winter clothing. This lifeline allowed the isolated forward companies, including the C Company at Rezangla, to remain in their high-altitude positions at 16,000 plus feet. The IAF also evacuated frostbite casualties from the earlier skirmishes and maintained the only reliable link between the Chushul garrison and the mainland India. The nearby Ladakhi villages, particularly Chushul, Pobrang, Ser, Saka, also contributed in quiet but indispensable ways. Local villages, many of them Changpa residents, served as porters, guides, and stretcher bearers, moving loads across treacherous snow-covered tracks where vehicles could not reach. They helped the Indian troops acclimatize by sharing knowledge of the terrain, weather shifts, water sources, and wind patterns. Though there have been some reports on the social media of intelligence leaks due to their proximity to the men on the ground. Next comes the composition and strength of the C Company. C Company, the Charlie Company, was a class company of Ahirs forming a 92 to 95% of Ahir majority. The battalion itself remained mixed class, contrary to the later claims of an Ahir regiment. Approximately 5 to 8 non-Ahir soldiers, Rajputs, Brahmins, and hillmen served mainly in support roles. The 7th, 8th, and 9th platoons were almost entirely Ahir. Each had 1 to 2 non-Ahir soldiers, while the company headquarters was a Ahir majority with 4 to 6 clerks, cooks, and signallers from mixed classes. The effective strength of the company was 120 soldiers, confirmed through the nominal roll and the reinforcements arriving on the 30th of October 1962. Next, we'll be talking about the Chinese forces and the equipment they were using. Opposing the Indian defenders was a reinforced battalion of the 3rd Battalion, 11th PLA Infantry Regiment, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Gao Panchang. Contemporary Indian assessments estimated that 600 to 900 Chinese troops were committed to the assault on Rezang, reflecting both the intensity of the engagement and the multiple waves of the attack observed. In contrast, Chinese official records describe a far smaller force, reporting limited engagement strength and claiming significantly lower casualties. Popular narratives that suggest 3,000 to 5,000 PLA troops attacking the position have no support in archival evidence and are not corroborated by either Indian operational records or declassified Chinese sources. The actual strength likely fell within the reinforced battalion range, consistent with the tactical requirements. Next, we'll be talking about the weapons, ammunition, and the operational constraints at the Battle of Rezang. At Rezang, the soldiers of C Company 13 Kumaon defended their positions with the standard infantry weapons of the Indian Army in 1962. The backbone of their firepower was the World War II vintage Lee Enfield bolt-action .303 rifle, supported by around 9 Bren-like machine guns and 2 3-inch motors deployed within platoon arcs for a close-range fire support. There were around 3 2-inch motors distributed between the platoons. Also, ammunition loads were modest. Most riflemen carried approximately 100 to 150. Some sources say 600 rounds, supplemented by a limited stock of 600 hand grenades and around 1,000 to 1,200 mortar bombs. The slender supply line into the Chushul sector, vulnerable to weather and enemy observation, meant that the C Company received far less than its authorized scales. As the battle intensified and the temperature plummeted below minus 24 degrees Celsius, weapon performance deteriorated. Rifle balls froze, oil thickened into sludge, and bipods fused to the ice. During the final stages of the engagement, several soldiers resorted to the captured PLA Type 56 rifles, whose 7.62 mm mechanisms proved less prone to cold-induced jamming. In contrast, Chinese units possessed superior winter clothing, lightweight automatic weapons, and more reliable resupply, magnifying the already daunting imbalance between the attackers and the isolated defenders on the ridge. During the Battle of Rezang on 18 November 1962, the People's Liberation Army employed a standardized set of infantry and support weapons that reflected China's post-Korean War Soviet-derived arsenal. Most PLA units engaged in the Chushul Spangur Gap sector, including those attacking C Company 13 Kumaon, were equipped with the Type 56 assault rifle 7.62 x 39 mm, Chinese licensed derivative of the AK-47. This weapon formed the backbone of Chinese infantry firepower and facilitated the characteristic close interval multi-wave assault tactics documented across the Sino-Indian War. Supplementing rifle fire were Type 56 RPT pattern light machine guns and Type 53 SG-43 pattern medium machine guns, both firing Soviet caliber ammunition. These provided suppressive and flanking fire from the reverse slope positions overlooking the Indian platoons. Chinese accounts and Indian after-action reports agree that automatic weapons were central to fixing Indian defenders before assault groups closed in at the short range. A defining element of the Chinese fires at Rezangla was the heavy reliance on 82 mm and 60 mm motors, Type 53 and Type 55 respectively. Motors constituted the principal indirect fire support because the high altitude terrain limited the deployment of the heavy artillery on forward slopes. Indian survivors and battlefield recoveries confirm extensive mortar crater patterns consistent with the PLA's standard practice of using 82 mm rounds for initial neutralizing fire and 60 mm tubes for close support during final assaults. To degrade Indian Sanghas and machine gun pits, Chinese infantry platoons were also supported by 57 mm and 75 mm recoilless rifles, Types 36 and Type 56/65, which were light enough to pack transport along narrow ridge lines. These weapons were frequently used in the 1962 campaign to breach stone fortifications and are cited in multiple Indian regimental histories as having destroyed or disabled forward firing positions at Rezangla. Although heavy artillery was not sighted on Rezangla Ridge itself, Chinese 122 mm howitzers, Type 54 and 76 mm mountain guns were positioned in deeper echelons behind the Spangor Gap, delivering intermittent preparatory fire before the infantry waves advanced. Close combat weapons, primarily Type 67 fragmentation grenades and older stick grenade variants, were employed in the final encirclement of the 7th, 8th, taken together, the PLA armament at Rezangla reflected a mature Soviet-style light infantry fire support system optimized for human wave assaults in mountainous terrain, automatic rifles for volume of fire, motors for preparatory bombardment, recoilless rifles for bunker reduction, and machine guns for suppressive coverage. The effectiveness of this combination, combined with the overwhelming numerical superiority, played a decisive role in overcoming the isolated Indian company positions. The C Company defensive position at Rezangla had been prepared as thoroughly as time and was ringed with barbed wire, crawl trenches, linked section posts to company headquarters, and limited overhead protection was available for platoon level command posts and light machine gun pits. Although stock of small arms ammunition were adequate, the company lacked mines, priority for these having gone to Gurung Hill and Magar Hill and Spangor Gap, and suffered critically from the absence of artillery, relying solely on its 3-inch motor section for fire support. The position was also isolated from the larger Spangor Gap complex, making mutual reinforcement impossible. The day of the battle itself, 18th November 1962. After declining the option of an organized withdrawal recommended by the brigade headquarters and battalion headquarters, following consultations with his NCOs and Jawans of all three platoons, and contrary to social media myths portraying a sunrise battle near Pangong Lake, verified military records, battalion war diaries, and survivor testimonies collectively confirm that the Battle of Rezangla was fought between 2 a.m. to 9 a.m. in the morning on the exposed Rezangla Ridge. Firstly, we'll be talking about the pre-battle night, or the night before the actual battle began, and what was the role of forward listening posts and probing yaks. In the final hours before the Battle of Rezangla, long before the Chinese assault waves massed on the frozen ridge, the first line of defense was not the platoons in their stone sangas, but the listening posts. These tiny exposed pits, carved into rock and positioned far ahead of the company's main line of defense, were manned by 2- and 3-man detachments whose task was deceptively simple and inherently lethal: to detect enemy in the pitch-dark Himalayan night. In the thin, dry Ladakhi air, sound carried sharply across the valley. It was here, hours before dawn, that the LPs sensed the first sign of the coming storm. The Chinese tried to conceal their reconnaissance patrols by driving pack yaks ahead of them, hoping the animals' movement would mask the sound of boots and equipment. But the Ahir Jawans, cattle herders since childhood, instantly recognized the deception, the unusual two-beat rhythm of a yak's hooves followed by a second stealthier retreat. The LPs waited, watched, and then opened fire with disciplined precision. Their brief bursts drove PLA scouts back, denying them instantly, firing controlled shots that lit up the snow and forced the Chinese to abort attempts to cut wire or map firing arcs. Each LP had been ordered to pass maximum information and then withdraw. But Major Shaitan Singh had instilled such spirit and resolve in his men that upon seeing the enemy approach, the LP commanders, the LP men chose to stand and fight rather than pull back. They wanted to be the first in C Company to strike the Chinese. They paid dearly for that decision, except for Lance Nayak Ram Singh, captured after being gravely wounded. Every LP Jaman was killed in action. Later described how his 3 men LP stalled the Chinese advance for nearly an hour, inflicting heavy casualties. At one point, Sipai Bharat Singh urged LP commander Lance Nayak Hukum Singh to withdraw, arguing that they have already warned the company and refused. Quote, "The longer we hold them and the more damage we inflict, the better our company's chances." Unable to advance further, the Chinese brought down artillery on the LP. A shell burst near Hukum Singh, killing him instantly. Ram Singh immediately took his place at the light machine gun, continuing to fire until another blast killed Bharat Singh. Even then, Ram Singh fought on, holding off enemy until a shell explosion tore away both his legs. He lost consciousness from his wounds and was taken prisoner and moved to a Chinese hospital. The other 2 LPs shared the same fate, fighting to the end. By the time the first full-scale assault struck the main defenses around 500 hours, every listening post had been wiped out, and their last stands bought C Company the precious time needed to ready weapons, man sangars, and face the oncoming waves. The LPs did not live to see the dawn over Rezangla, but in those silent freezing hours, they became the unseen shield of C Company, the first to hear the enemy, the first to fire, and the first to fall. What is important here is the information passed on by the LPs and corroborated by 788 platoons was the reporting of 14 trucks with Chinese soldiers equipped with 7.62 self-loading rifles, assembling in the staging area for assault on the ridge. Later on, it was corroborated that there were more medium machine guns than our 9 Bren light machine guns and 10 big artillery guns against our 2 and 3-inch motor sections. C Company 13 Kumaon. Before dawn, on 18 November 1962, a patrol from C Company detected Chinese forces assembling in the forward staging area at approximately 400 hours. At 500 hours, the first PLA assault wave struck the Rezangla defenses and was repulsed with heavy casualties. This was followed by a short but intense bombardment of artillery and mortars, after which renewed attacks began from multiple directions. The main axis of advance originated from the north, east, and east, placing intense pressure on the forward platoon positions. Additional PLA elements maneuvered through the southeastern depression to envelop the right flank, while a smaller force applied secondary pressure from the south to engage defenders. Contemporary Indian accounts, the Chinese advanced in doctrinal echelons, sapper teams probing the defenses, followed by assault platoons of roughly 30 to 50 men with automatic weapon elements, providing supporting fire. Survivors reported bugle calls, initiating waves, although these do not appear in Chinese accounts. The C Company commanded Major Shaitan Singh held a widely dispersed stone sangar arc manned by 7, 8, and 9 platoons. The 7th platoon under Jamadar Sujaram occupied the northern spur. The 8th platoon under Jamadar Hari Ram held the central sector. and the 9th Platoon under Jamadar Ramchandar guarded the southern spur. With the listening posts annihilated early in the action, Chinese commander launched a frontal assault on 7th and 8th platoons, trapping his troops in the interlocking arcs of fire. Brain gunners and riflemen, firing steadily in freezing temperatures and low oxygen, cut through the leading Chinese elements. The 3-inch mortar section inflicted further casualties at close range. Realizing that the frontal sector has become a killing ground, the PLA redirected its strength to the flanks and rear, making its movement with intense artillery and mortar fire. With no Indian artillery or air support available, the Chinese guns enjoyed nearly unrestricted freedom of fire. By around 600 hours, due to the constant Chinese bombardment and extreme conditions on the ground, radio communication with company headquarters ceased, leaving the platoons isolated. 7th Platoon, led by Jamadar, that is Naib Subedar Surja Ram, was attacked by nearly 400 to 500 Chinese on the left flank. Surja Ram called for mortar fire, which landed directly among the first echelon of roughly 130 attackers, inflicting heavy casualties. Still, the Chinese pressed forward. The enemy breached the wire. Ahir soldiers with the war cry Dada Kishan Ki Jai fought with rifles, bayonets, stones and bare hands, with Lance Naik Singh Ram, a wrestler of repute, thrashing and killing at least 10 Chinese soldiers with his bare hands. After suffering extremely heavy casualties, the Chinese infantry brought up fresh reinforcements along with a medium machine gun to break the resistance of 7th Platoon. When the MMG's fire began sweeping their position, Naik Gulab Singh and Lance Naik Singh Ram rushed forward in a desperate charge to silence the gun, just a few feet short. Nearly all men of the platoon already killed, the remaining defenders, including the resolute platoon commander Jamadar Surja Ram, continued fighting until every one of them fell at their post. Note here was that bayonets were not as effective as they should have been due to the thick Chinese coat parka. A splinter struck Surja Ram on the head and his last words were, quote, "Ladte raho, tera Kumaon ka naam uncha rakho," unquote. 7th Platoon fought to the last man. 8th Platoon under Jamadar Hari Ram faced an assault of similar strength from the right flank. The Chinese breached the wire with explosives and attacked the forward section, suffering heavy losses in the first wave. A second wave maneuvered behind the platoon's death positions and headquarters, triggering furious hand-to-hand combat. Outnumbered by more than 10 to 1, the Ahirs fought on. The third section under Lance Naik Chandagi Ram repelled 6 successive assaults before being both 7th and 8th platoons had been. Between 700 hours and 800 hours, a large Chinese outflanking force of nearly 800 to 1,000 troops and yaks completed its maneuver behind C Company. Its objectives were threefold: to reinforce attacks on 7th and 8th Platoon, to attack the mortar section, company headquarters, and 9th Platoon from the rear, and to seal off all escape routes. The mortar section of 12 men, commanded by Naik Ramkumar, had been firing continuously since the battle's commencement. Bombs were dropped at ranges as close as 30 to 40 meters. In the PLA's move towards the 9th Platoon, the entire mortar detachment was annihilated. Ramkumar, though severely wounded with his nose blown off, survived by remaining still until dark and then crawling through the Chinese line to battalion headquarters the next morning. Between 800 to 900 hours, the Chinese intensified their envelopment, infiltrating behind the northern spur, pushing through the eastern depression and rolling up the southern flank. Ammunition across the company dwindled to just a few rounds per man. Several bodies later found forward of the Sanghas indicated Jawans who had picked up captured Type 56 rifles and fought on. The medical assistant who treated around 32 wounded before being shot in the head. Jamadar Hari Ram, under punishing Chinese artillery and medium machine gun fire, moved fearlessly from trench to trench, rallying his men and urging them to hold their ground despite mounting casualties. Exposed repeatedly While motivating his platoon, he was mortally wounded by a machine gun burst, but not before ensuring that his men continued resisting with unwavering fighting. Naik Sahiram waited for the Chinese to bunch together before opening fire with his LMG, causing heavy casualties. Across the position, grenades exploded inside Sangars and bitter close quarter combat raged as ammunition ran out. 9 platoon facing the final envelopment fought on with only a handful of riflemen. Major Shaitan Singh, wounded in arm, moved between bunkers under point-blank fire, repositioning LMG detachments and encouraging his men. Jemadar Ramchandra, the commander of 9th platoon, fought on even after his entire platoon had been wiped out. Refusing to withdraw or abandon his post, he continued engaging the enemy alone until he collapsed unconscious from his wounds. Believing him dead, the Chinese troop bypassed his position and he later regained consciousness and survived, becoming one of the very few defenders of Rezangla to live through the battle. While at the company headquarters, ignoring persistent requests from his CHM, Company Havaldar Major Harpul Singh, Major Shaitan Singh remained at his forward positions even as the situation around them deteriorated, and his small command post group was reduced to a handful of men. When further organized resistance from his position became impossible, he moved out with a small party of about 4 soldiers from company headquarters, including his radio operator Sipahi Ramchandra Yadav, attempting to shift position under intense Chinese fire. The group was soon detected, 2 of the men were killed, and Major Shaitan Singh was hit again, this time in his abdomen by the enemy medium machine gun fire, causing him to fall instantly with his intestines coming out, which remained in its place just because of the belt he was wearing. Jai Narayan and Harpul Singh carried their mortally wounded commander to the cover of a boulder, realizing that any further attempt to move him would draw fire and endanger their lives. He ordered his men to leave him and try to save themselves rather than attempt an evacuation. His injuries at around 8:15 hours, not before ordering Sipahi Ramchandra, himself injured with a sharpnel in his leg, to leave for the battalion headquarters to tell them about the company's 15 hours seems to be credible, as according to the eyewitness account of Sipahi Ramchandra and later corroborated by the watch Major Bhati used to wear, worked with his pulse movement and stopped on his death. Before leaving to ask for help down the valley, Sipahi Ramchandra tried to cover the mortal remains of the major with snow, which was now around 6 feet deep, as he had promised to the company Havaldar Major Harpul Singh that he would not allow the Chinese to get hold of the Major Saab's body. By 0900 hours, all forward positions had been overrun. None had surrendered or visited. Months later, Indian soldiers were found frozen in their firing positions, fingers covalently ice-bonded on triggers, bayonets fixed, Brent gunners slumped over burst barrels, which had become red hot despite falling snow during the fighting, and later on, rescue parties had to cut the fused fingers and break the rigor mortis to bring the martyrs down for cremation. Subsided only after the partial fall of Gurung Hill and complete Chinese control of the Rezangla Ridge by about 2200 hours. Yet the stand of C Company had achieved its strategic aim. The PLA advance towards the Chushul airfield was halted. The approaches to the Spangur Gap remained contested, and a deeper Chinese breakthrough into Ladakh was prevented. Indian accounts generally describe 7 to 8 Chinese human wave assaults, though the exact number fighting happened between 0330 hours to 0730 hours. Leadership of Major Shaitan Singh. Major Shaitan Singh possessed precisely the kind of background that made him singularly suited for command at Rezang. Earlier in his career, he had served with the Umaid Kota infantry in the Dras sector in the late 1940s, just after the Indo-Pak conflict. Reportedly, the only officer in his battalion to have done so. In 1961, he participated in the Goa Liberation Operation, and although he did not see active combat, he is known to have been personally disappointed by this. Professionally, he had completed the junior command course as well as specialized courses in intelligence and motors, later serving as an instructor. Drawing on this expertise, he personally selected and positioned the mortar detachment during the Battle of Rezang. Popular narratives often reduce Major Shaitan Singh to a lone heroic figure, but verified accounts depict something far more extraordinary. A commander executing mobile, adaptive, and textbook-perfect leadership under fire, at an altitude where simply walking briskly can leave a man gasping. Throughout the battle, Major Shaitan Singh moved continuously between the 7th, 8th, and 9th platoon, traversing 300 to 500 meters of exposed ridgeline under machine gun fire and mortar fire, often crawling over rocks with ammunition clips, grenades, verbal orders, and field updates to keep the platoons tactically synchronized after communication lines were cut. And as ammunitions dwindled, he personally directed cross-platoons resupply, sending runners with Bren magazines and grenades to threatened positions, several of whom were killed while carrying out his orders, while simultaneously maintaining fire discipline by instructing NCOs to shift to control fire, adjusting Bren arcs himself, and ensuring 8th and 9th platoons maintained interlocking Chinese flanking maneuvers threatened 7th platoon. He ordered a contraction into secondary sangars to preserve cohesion. And when 9th platoon faced envelopment, he coordinated overlapping fire with 8th platoon to turn the central saddle into a kill zone, buying the company precious time. Soldiers later remembered him as calm and steady, offering reassurance, and his presence under impossible conditions kept the company from breaking. He gave his personal pistol to Sipahi Mamchand of Platoon 9 to deposit it with the battalion quartermaster so that it would not fall into enemy hands. This shows his sense of honor, ethics, and probity. His relationship with his men was that of a family member. Although he was a Bhati Rajput from Rajasthan, he would often call his troops to consider him as an Ahir and even address him as Yadav. This gesture reflected his belief in service to the nation and the welfare of the men he led, placing his command's cohesion and morale above all else in the finest traditions of the Indian Army. Casualties. Indian casualties verified. The Battle of Rezang resulted in 114 confirmed Indian fatalities, reflecting the near total sacrifice of C Company 13 Kumaon. One soldier, Sipahi Ramchandra Yadav, the radio operator, was sent back by Major Bhati for the final stages of the battle to relay the account of company's last stand. Naik Ramkumar of the motor section leader, though wounded, also returned without becoming a POW. Additionally, 4 Indian soldiers were taken prisoner. Shot through both his arms managed to escape, while 2 were repatriated after the war and 1 died in the Chinese captivity. Among the fallen at Rezangla were the close kin groups whose losses become emblematic of the battle's tragedy. Brothers Singhram and Rajkumar died fighting side by side, while Havaldar Harful Singh and his brother-in-law Lance Naik Brijral also fell together, representing the traditional Salajija bond. These family ties, brothers and brother-in-law, highlight how the sacrifice at Rezangla cut deeply into individual households, with multiple members of the same families laying down their lives in a single action. In the aftermath of this devastating engagement, the Kumaon regiment adopted an informal tradition of not assigning 2 brothers to the same company to mitigate the risk of simultaneous loss within a single family. Chinese casualties, which are contested, Chinese official records claim 21 soldiers killed and 98 wounded in the engagement. However, Indian accounts consistently estimate much higher Chinese losses, with some post-war narratives suggesting figures exceeding 1,300 casualties. Despite these claims, no verified archival evidence currently supports such 4-digit casualty numbers, leaving the true extent of Chinese losses a matter of debate among field recovery evidence and Cardozo's account. In early, that is 10th of February 1963, a Ladakhi shepherd reported bodies on the ridge, and the Indian Army's recovery parties with civil authorities under the aegis of International Red Cross subsequently found Major Shaitan Singh's body exactly where he had been left, sheltered behind a boulder hollow. They also found 9 Indian bayonets planted upright beside the bodies of men killed in action, and a note on Naik Singh Ram, quote, "Here lies a brave Indian soldier," unquote, widely interpreted as rare Chinese gesture of respect. Recovery teams also found trenches strewn with grenade levers and spent cartridges, rifles and brenns, evidence of the desperate close-range fighting. Not one eye was dry after what the recovery party saw. Brigadier Raina tried so much that his prosthetic eye fell out of the socket. Major General Ian Cardozo's description of battlefield remains foundational. Cardozo frames Rezangla as one of the greatest infantry's last stands in the world, placing it in the same lineage as the legendary battles such as Thermopylae of 480 BCE, where 300 Spartans held the pass against the overwhelming Persian forces, Battle of Saragari of 1897, where 36th Sikh Regiment fought to the last against the thousands of tribal warriors on the northwest frontier, and the Battle of Alamo of 1836, an iconic stand in which the Texan defenders resisted the Mexican army despite being vastly outnumbered. General Ian Cardozo further states, when Rezangla was later revisited, dead Jawans were found in their trenches, still holding on to their weapons. Every single man of this company was found dead in his trench with several bullets or splinter wounds. The 2-inch motorman died with a bomb still in his hand, one of the last 8 rounds left with the section. The medical orderly had a syringe and a bandage in his hands when a Chinese bullet hit last round. Jamadar Hariram, with his head bandaged and his body riddled with 47 bullets, was found in the crouching position. Not one of them abandoned his post. Rezangla remains a shining example of raw courage, discipline, and devotion to duty. The evidence established the last man, last round legacy of Rezangla. After the battle, villagers from the nearby settlements guided recovery teams to the bodies buried under the deep snowdrifts and helped perform the cremation and last rites at Chushul. Their assistance reflected the enduring bond between Indian Army and the Ladakhi communities who lived on the frontiers itself. Only the body of Major Shaitan Singh was airlifted back to Jodhpur. The rest were honored at Chushul. With no wood and vegetation available in the barren valley, the troops dismantled the officers' mess, living quarters, and even the brigade office to build the funeral pyres. Under the supervision of Brigadier T. N. Raina, a collective cremation was conducted with full military honors, an austere, solemn, and unprecedented farewell on one of the harshest battlefields of the Himalayas. A formal memorial was erected at Rezangla in 1963, and additional memorials across India, particularly in Ahirwal, continue to preserve the legacy of Sikh stands at the very site of their cremation. While prominent memorials such as the one in Rewari, Haryana, honor the Ahir soldiers whose courage has become central to the battle, stated, quote, "In military history, you rarely come across such examples when facing such heavy odds, the men fought to the last bullet and the last man. Indeed, in the annals of war, the name of 13 Kumaon deserves to be written in the letters of gold," unquote. He further remarked that Rezangla proved the Indian Army, quote, "must have an Ahir the community's long martial heritage." Military historians, including Praval, Pradhan, Cardozo, Yadav, consistently regard the battle as one of the most remarkable company-level last stands in world military history, distinguished by its isolation, scale, and the extraordinary resolve of its. Now we'll talk about the narrative versus verified military history of the Battle of Rezangla. Public memory and popular narratives of the Battle of Rezangla often simplify or distort the historical record, whereas verified military archives and survivor testimonies present a far more nuanced account. Social media retellings frequently misstate the chronology and geography of the engagement, sometimes placing it near Pangong Lake, yet military records confirm that the battle occurred on 18th of November 1962 at Rezangla Pass in the Chushul sector of Ladakh, beginning with Chinese probing at 0200 hours and escalating into multi-wave assaults between 0500 hours and 0900 hours. It unfolded concurrently with the Battle of Gurung Hill and formed part of the broader defense of the Chushul airfield from 14th to 18th of November under 114th Infantry Brigade. One of the most persistent public misconceptions concerns the identity of the defenders. Popular narratives incorrectly refer to them as Ahir Regiment, despite no such regiment existed in the Indian Army. In reality, the position was defended by the C. Charlie Company of the 13th Kumaon Regiment, a mixed-class battalion organized into class company structures. C Company itself was a class company of Ahirs, giving it an exceptionally high 92 to 95% Ahir composition, supported by 5 to 8 non-Ahir personnel, that is, Rajputs, Brahmins, and Kumaoni Garwali hillmen, serving mainly in headquarters and support roles. Each combat platoon, 7th, 8th, and 9th, was almost entirely Ahir, and the company headquarters remained. Popular claims of 121, 123, or 125 defenders contradict regimentally documented records confirming an operational strength of 120 soldiers, including reinforcements added on 30th of October 1962. Casualty narratives are also distorted. The widespread assertion that all 120 were killed is not true, and even the numbers of prisoners taken by Chinese are incorrect. Official records confirm 114 killed and 1 sent back to relay the message of the last stand, 1 moved back to the battalion when the darkness fell, and 4 taken as prisoners, of whom 1 escaped back to the battalion, 2 returned alive after the war, and 1 died in the Chinese captivity. Assertions that company inflicted 1,000 to 1,500 PLA casualties lack documentary evidence. While Chinese losses were substantial, no authoritative archival source supports 4-digit Chinese casualties. 120 were killed is not true, and even the numbers of prisoners taken by Chinese are incorrect. Official records confirm 114 killed and 1 sent back to relay the message of the last stand, 1 moved back to the battalion when the darkness fell, and 4 taken as prisoners, of whom 1 escaped back to the battalion, 2 returned alive after the war, and 1 died in the Chinese captivity. Assertions that company inflicted 1,000 to 1,500 PLA casualties lack documentary evidence. While Chinese losses were substantial, no authoritative archival source supports 4-digit Chinese casualties, and Chinese military records report 21 dead and 98 wounded. Again, it can be dead and 98 wounded, which again is not correct. Survivor testimonies, including those of Subedar Honorary Captain Ramchandar, Sepoy and radio operator then, and Naib Subedar Nihal Singh, Sepoy and LMG operator, and Major Shaitan Singh's personal bodyguard with the company headquarters, depict a tactically complex defense marked by repeated PLA assault waves, sub-zero temperatures, ammunition exhaustion that prevented Indian guns from engaging targets on the ridge. Popular portrayals of Major Shaitan Singh as a solitary action hero overlook confirmed accounts describing him repeatedly moving between platoons under intense fire, reorganizing defensive positions, redistributing ammunition, and motivating exhausted soldiers until he was fatally wounded between platoons 7 and 8. Recovery teams later found many soldiers still in their trenches with weapons in hands, underscoring the disciplined platoon by platoon nature of the stand, distinct from the exaggerated online narrative of 120. The Battle of Rezang often reduce its gallantry record to Major Shaitan Singh's Paramveer Chakra, overlooking the wider constellation of honors awarded for exceptional leadership and sacrifice, most of them posthumously. The engagement produced a cohort of decorated soldiers that included Veer Chakras for Jamadar Hari Ram posthumously, Jamadar Surja Ram posthumously, and Jamadar Honorary Captain Ramchandar, as well as non-commissioned officers such as Naik Hukumchand posthumously, Naik Gulab Singh posthumously, Ram posthumously, Naik Ram Kumar, and Nursing Assistant Dharmpal Singh Daya posthumously, whose contributions are frequently misrepresented or omitted in public memory. Additional recognition came through the conferment of Sena Medal on Havaldar Jai Narayan posthumously, Company Havaldar Major Harful Singh posthumously, Sipahi Nihal Singh, and Sipahi Ramchandar Yadav. while one soldier was mentioned in dispatches. Together, these honors illustrate that the battle's legacy extends far beyond the single iconic award. Moreover, these also constitute the maximum gallantry awards won in a single action post India's independence. An interesting thing to note here is that most of the awardees belong to the Ahirwal belt of Haryana, Rajasthan in the Indo-Gangetic plains. The aftermath is also frequently romanticized or overlooked. After the battle, bodies were brought down to the Chushul plains, but returning every martyr to the Kargil, martyrs were flown to their native places. Only Major Shaitan Singh's body was sent to his hometown of Jodhpur. The remaining soldiers received a collective cremation, personally supervised by Brigadier T. N. Raina. As Chushul lacked even a twig of vegetation, soldiers dismantled the wooden furniture from an old school officers' mess, living quarters, and parts of the brigade headquarters to build the funeral pyres, an extraordinary act of respect in a barren, icy landscape. Despite this rich and rigorously documented operational history, popular discourse often flattens tactical complexity and emphasizes individual heroism, such as Kulpreet Yadav and K.C. Praval stress the importance of resisting exaggerations to preserve the integrity of one of the most remarkable platoon-level last stands in the modern military history. Strategically, Rezangla's defense prevented a potential PLA breakthrough to the Chushul airfield, helping preserve Ladakh's defensive posture during a critical phase of the war. The verified story needs no embellishment. Approximately 120 soldiers, overwhelmingly from the Ahir community, held their ground with extraordinary cohesion, discipline, and courage. Rezangla's legacy has endured in India's cultural consciousness through music, cinema, and modern media. In 1963, Kavi Pradeep's patriotic ode, "Ae Mere Watan Ke Logo," sung by Lata Mangeshkar, became a national tribute to the fallen. Soon after, Chetan Anand's film Hakikat in 1964, starring Dharmendra, Balraj Sahani, Priya Rajwans, Sanjay Khan, and Vijay Anand, offered the first cinematic portrayal of the 1962 war. The story resurfaced in newer productions such as the 1962 The War in the Hills of 2021, directed by Mahesh Manjrekar, and the most recently 120 Bahadur 2025, directed by Major Shaitan Singh. Together, these works sustain the memory of Rezangla across generations. However, popular culture often neglects the broader operational context. Rezangla was a part of the coordinated defense of Chushul under the 114 into an individualized hero arc. Contemporary debates invoking Rezangla to support demands for an Ahir regiment similarly overlook the Ministry of Defense post-1947 policy prohibiting new caste-based regiments, making such proposals institutionally implausible despite the undeniable centrality of Ahir soldiers in the battle. Cinematic portrayals, particularly 120 Bahadur, takes notable liberties with established history, exaggerating PLE troop strength, portraying C Company as an all-Ahir battalion, and depicting Major Shaitan Singh as a lone action hero rather than a commander. Battlefield aesthetics ignore the actual narrow, windswept, high altitudes, the documented survivors and prisoners of war, whose testimonies remain essential to the historical understanding. As military historians note, these choices compress tactical complexity and overshadow the disciplined unit-level defense. Finally, I'll be talking about the contemporary mobilization and the legal political developments in the demand for an Ahir. The demand for an Ahir regiment frequently draws legitimacy from the historical precedent of two post-independence regiments that follow single-class or region-based recruitment criteria. The first is the Ladakh Scouts, initially raised as a militia companies on 1st June 1963, shortly after the 1962 war, and later elevated to a full-fledged regiment in the year 2000, recruiting primarily from the Ladakhi and high-altitude Tibetan plateau populations. The second is the Naga Regiment, established on 1st of November 1970, originally raised at the Kumaon Regimental Center and subsequently recognized as an independent regiment, recruiting predominantly by the supporters of an Ahir regiment as evidence that community or region-based formations have existed even after independence. In contemporary times, the demand for an Ahir regiment has been championed principally by the Sanyuk Ahir Regiment Morcha, a registered charitable trust that has led sustained mobilization since the year 2022. The Morcha has organized large-scale protests, community gatherings, and public campaigns, and has also acted as the lead petitioner in the litigation before the Delhi High Court concerning the film 120 Bahadur, Sayut Ahir Regiment Morcha and others versus Union of India and others, the year 2025. Wider mobilization has also been driven by long-standing organizations such as All India Yadav Mahasabha, which conducted a nationwide postcard campaign in the year 2017, urging the governments to raise an Ahir or Yadav regiment. Parliamentary interventions have repeatedly raised the matter, but the official responses in Lok Sabha have consistently clarified that the proposal for raising an Ahir regiment is not under consideration. Citing the Government of India's policy against forming new regimental institutional barrier despite strong community sentiment and historical association of Ahir soldiers with Rezang. The movement entered the judicial arena in 2025 not directly through the constitutional demand for a regiment, but via disputes over the historical representation of Rezangla. The Punjab and Haryana High Court declined to entertain a public interest litigation seeking a title change for 120 Bahadur, while the Delhi High Court disposed of a similar petition permitting the film's release but directing the producers to ensure that the names of all the 120 Rezangla soldiers interventions focused only on representational fairness rather than on recognition of the regimental demand itself. Taken together, these developments reveal a clear pattern. While socio-political mobilization for an Ahir regiment remains vigorous with deep emotional and historical roots linked to Rezangla, neither Parliament nor the courts has endorsed the creation of a separate regiment. Instead, official institutions have limited their engagement to matters of representation and accuracy in public narratives, maintaining the long-standing policy framework governing regimental structures in Indian Army. Finally, Rezangla's enduring legacy rests not on romanticized retellings, but on the verified extraordinary deeds of approximately 120 defenders, overwhelmingly Ahirs who held their isolated platoon positions against vastly superior numbers and prevented a People's Liberation Army airfield. Their stands remain one of the most exceptional platoon level and would like to see more stories that honor our history and our heroes. Please like the video, share it, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps keep these legends alive.